of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, You shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day you eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. The childlikeness of this dialogue, and the ease with which our first parents fell into the transgression of the only commandment which had been given them, indicate the untested nature of their virtue. Everything had been given them by God's grace, but they were not yet skilled in tilling and keeping their inward state. Men were indeed created to be gods and sons of the Most High. Temptation offered by the devil contains the same elements we fallen men know in our own fight against sin. He offers first of all not an obvious evil, but something which seems good and true. Men were indeed created to be gods and sons of the Most High, as it says in the Psalms, and were aware that from paradise they were to ascend to a higher condition. The devil, therefore, as it were, thought to himself, as St. Ambrose expresses it, quote, This, therefore, is my first approach, namely to deceive him while he is desirous of improving his condition. In this way an attempt will be made to arouse his ambition. Unquote. In causing our first ancestors to look at the good thing of becoming like gods, the devil hoped to cause them to forget the small commandment, which was the way God ordained them to achieve this goal. Men were indeed created to be gods and sons of the Most High.
As we approach death, many people will panic. It is a panic because no matter how much we may convince ourselves or believe that there is no God, the soul recognizes that it must leave the body. The soul understands that it is about to enter eternity, that it must face God. If we cling to the vanities of this world, we deny God, we reject God, we turn away from God. And at death, we face one we have not known. But in his love, this King, this God, continues to pour out to us the gifts, the tools, the weapons necessary. We may enter into God's eternal kingdom. That we may enter into God's eternal kingdom. He constantly reaches out to us to draw us back to Him. The choice is ours. Here we are in this world for a brief moment. The trees around me will still be here when I've died. This world will go on long after our death. But we enter through the door of death into eternity. Do we enter to meet the King we know, that we've grown to love and trust? Or do we enter eternity facing judgment from a stranger?
And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, You shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, You shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day you eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. The childlikeness of this dialogue, and the ease with which our first parents fell into the transgression of the only commandment which had been given them, indicate the untested nature of their virtue. Everything had been given them by God's grace, but they were not yet skilled in killing and keeping their inward state. Men were indeed created to be gods and sons of the Most High. Temptation offered by the devil contains the same elements we fallen men know in our own fight against sin. He offers first of all not an obvious evil, but something which seems good and true. Men were indeed created to be gods and sons of the Most High, as it says in the Psalms, and were aware that from paradise they were to ascend to a higher condition. The devil, therefore, as it were, thought to himself, as St. Ambrose expresses it, quote, This, therefore, is my first approach, namely to deceive him while he is desirous of improving his condition. In this way an attempt will be made to arouse his ambition. Unquote. In causing our first ancestors to look at the good thing of becoming like gods, the devil hoped to cause them to forget the small commandment, which was the way God ordained them to achieve this goal. Men were indeed created to be gods and sons of the Most High.
as we approach death, many people will panic. It is a panic because no matter how much we may convince ourselves or believe that there is no God, the soul recognizes that it must leave the body. The soul understands that it is about to enter eternity, that it must face God. If we cling to the vanities of this world, we deny God, we reject God, we turn away from God. And at death, we face one we have not known. But in His love, this King, this God, continues to pour out to us the gifts, the tools, the weapons necessary. We may enter into God's eternal kingdom. That we may enter into God's eternal kingdom. He constantly reaches out to us to draw us back to Him. The choice is ours. Here we are in this world for a brief moment. The trees around me will still be here when I've died. This world will go on long after our death. But we enter through the door of death into eternity. Do we enter to meet the King we know, that we've grown to love and trust? Or do we enter eternity facing judgment from a stranger?
And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, You shall not...
All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos, and tonight I want to talk to you guys about sex, drugs, and magic, church fathers against Gnostic heresies. And so tonight should be a really fun night. What we're going to be doing is diving into a lot of the polemical work by various church fathers. I got stuff. We're going to be looking at Irenaeus, Eusebius, Epiphanius, and Hippolytus. And so for church fathers, we're going to look at some of their first 3 century work against and refutations against some of these Gnostic heresies. I've talked to you guys before about how I'd like to start doing some more topics on Gnosticism. And this is, I was thinking, oh, well, maybe I'll title it an introduction to Gnosticism, but I thought that'd be a little bit boring. So I want to get into, and I've talked to you guys before about a theory that I'm trying to work on and put together in regards to my research, looking at Gnostic resurgence, various heresies that reemerge in the medieval period, specifically the Cathars in southern France, and you got the Bogomils over in Bulgaria, and the Paulicians over in Armenia. But before doing a stream like on medieval Gnostic heresies or whatnot, I thought it'd be good to first get our feet wet with what the church fathers discussed. And so we're going to, like I said, dive into 4 different church fathers and look at a variety of different discussions on these Gnostic cults and some of the activities they're engaging in, of which we will see promiscuous forms of sexuality. For a few instances, there's certainly cases of pharmakia. Pharmakia is the idea of using plants or inebriating substances for the attainment of, for ritualistic processes. I mean, generally speaking, in the history of magic, drugs are used for the purpose of altering one's consciousness to get access to the spirit world, to make certain rituals more efficacious, or to acquire gnosis. And so that's where it's not unfathomable, obviously, that you would find some of these practices in ancient Gnosticism. As I'm sure you guys already know, Gnosticism comes from the ancient Greek word gnosis, which just means knowledge. And what these various cults were in this ancient period they were cults in the search for spiritual gnosis, and it's through the acquisition of this particular type of spiritual knowledge that one can be liberated, set free from the confines of this life, this world, this existence. And so I want to use today's stream. It's not going to be a huge intro. We're not going to be doing a huge monologue, because I really want to work through looking at orgies, looking at the use of drugs, looking at accusations of magic from the church fathers, and just provide a framework for if somebody's not familiar with any of these topics, that this should be a very useful framework for further conversations and future streams, whether we get into the medieval, whether we get more specific about certain groups that we're going to be talking about tonight or whatnot, because from this stream, we can then go much deeper into each of these topics. So there's a few groups that we're going to be really focusing on, because we need to realize that Gnosticism as a category is very, very tricky. It's very tricky. And so anybody who talks about Gnosticism in very generalistic terms, beware. Beware. And even though we're going to be kind of dabbling into that rhetoric tonight, we have to give credit where credit is due. And certainly Michael Allen Williams, in his book, Rethinking Gnosticism, he's one of the more contemporary scholars in this field, and talks about how the grouping, the general grouping together of the term Gnosticism is a little bit tricky. That these groups, these cults, are much more pluralistic and diverse from each other, and in fact, in many cases, they're competing with each other. So then what exactly are the unifiers here? Well, generally speaking, what we then use to classify and group these Gnostic groups together is their radical dualistic worldview. So this ancient form of Gnosticism, and again, it incorporated many Christian attributes. Some of these Gnostic scriptures, as I'll describe here in a moment. And so it had a sort of Judeo-Christian lens. In fact, there's a book that I was wanting to get, but a lot of the research, like the academic-worthy text that you use for this this type of research, it's like $100 and some. I mean, $150. There's a few books that I would love to get. One is on Jewish magic and early Gnosticism, $140, of course. This one right here is very expensive. Go look this one up on Amazon. The Polemical Heresy. This is sort of the #1 book on the Gnostic Heresies over in Armenia. But these Gnostic groups are generally grouped together because of this dualistic worldview of which good and evil is really battling each other out right now. Now, of course, we know that this is not consistent with an Orthodox worldview. We are not dualist. The only thing that has positive existence are the uncreated energies of God, and therefore the dialectical opposite of those are really just a term, a category, a placeholder for that which is lacking of. Same thing with the shadow and light. Same thing with coldness and heat. But for these Gnostics, they understood creation itself as a corruption, that it was created by a sort of bastardized demigod. They called it Yaldabaoth, Beelzebub, the demiurge, whatever it is. They understood, many of these groups, they had a sort of Marcionite understanding of the Old Testament, that being that the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament aren't the same God. And I'm sure we've heard people say this to us now, especially if we're Orthodox or Christian, that this is a common thing people have heard. And the idea that the gods of the Old and New Testament were different allowed them to sort of reconfigure a hermeneutic, an interpretation of Scripture, an interpretation of text, in which the Old Testament is talking about this sort of bastardized God, which is a birth from Sophia. So there's like a demi-goddess, and she is tied with the pure realm of light called the pleroma. And again, even some of these Gnostic groups have different understandings of this myth, but generally speaking, to give the most general framework before we dive into what the church fathers talk about, it's interesting to know how are they differentiating themselves from what the apostles, the 12 apostles, which then the book of Acts, they go out and try to establish this Orthodox church. What is it they are up competing against? And so this Gnostic understanding reinterprets the Old Testament as actually describing the God that is controlling us. It created a bastardized creation in which it is trapping that light that is uncreated. So for the Gnostic, there is a light inside you, inside a lot of different things that's sort of reminiscent of the realm of pure light. And that's what Jesus Christ is. He's the incarnation of this pure light. But this physical world is so nasty that it's actually corrupted. And we have to escape the physical world to get back to the non-physical perfection. And so again, you could be much more specific going into different groups to talk about this, but we'll just use that general framework. And so from there, then you can see within this world, it is by definition, in essence, demonic, fallen, corrupted. And therefore, what is the goal of the spiritual life for the Gnostic? The goal is then to escape this bastardized creation. And you do so with gnosis, through secret knowledge, through knowledge that liberates. And so one of the things that if you look into Kurt Rudolph, he's a German scholar that has some really good stuff regarding Gnosticism. Kurt Rudolph, I'd highly recommend this book. But he'll tell you right here that Gnostic cults are the continuation of these ancient mystery traditions. And so some of you may be familiar with the mystery of Eleusis, that inebriating festival that celebrated the death and rebirth of Persephone, Demeter and Persephone, these Greek goddesses, and Persephone goes down to the underworld captured by Hades, and then she reemerges. And that this mystery of Eleusis is depicting the true mystery of all this stuff. And again, if you read The Road to Eleusis, R. Gordon Wasson, Albert Hoffman, Carl A.P. Ruck, they argue that Eleusis was an ergotized psychoactive brew. That was the Kekion. And you can find these inebriating mystery cults. You can look at Soma over in India. You can look at Zoroastrian use of Haoma and Pagaman Harmala. You can look at the mysteries of Isis over in Egypt. You can look at the mysteries of Mithras. And Mithras, we typically will look at Rome, but Mithraism was an expansive religion that went all the way to Persia. And so it was competing with Zoroastrianism at times in Persian culture, Persian history. So we can look at these ancient mystery cults, which were all about, many believe, various sexual practices and the use of intoxicating substances, and most definitely forms of ritualistic magic. Again, maybe they wouldn't interpret the magic in the same way that a Christian or somebody coming from that phallogocentric Christian perspective, but they were using these things to become enlightened, to illuminate, to liberate themselves in one way or another. And so when you look at Gnosticism and all these cults, you see that immediately from the beginning of Christianity, there were people who were claiming that they had the true understanding of Christ's teachings. And they would take Christ's teachings and they would map it onto some of these ancient mystery theologies. They would talk about Platonism and have a very Platonic worldview. I mean, because you can see if matter is bad, it right there starts to take on a sort of Platonic lens, right? Because for Plato, the realm of the ideal, the non-physical realm, is that which is perfected, all moving back towards the true one, right? The good in a Platonic sense. And that's for Middle Platonism, and that's certainly true then for Neoplatonism. So Gnosticism definitely builds upon Plato. It builds upon many of these mystery traditions. Again, you look up Kurt Rudolph right here, and I'll just read you a section, again, highlighting that Gnosticism, these groups, it's not entirely unique. What it is, it's a syncretic cult. These different groups, and we'll be talking about the Carpocratians, the Borborites, the Simonians, the Valentinians, the Ophites, that all these groups are somewhat similar in their general dualism and their understanding of creation, of their appropriation of Christian and Jewish understandings. but they're also a little bit unique. They have a different emphasis. They liberate, they acquire gnosis, secret knowledge, in different ways. And so it's important to realize that they are syncretic cults. Each of these little Gnostic groups are unique in their own sense to a degree, but they're totally embodying much of what we would consider esoteric practices, magical practices, even if you want to use maybe a shamanic understanding of practices that were around in the ancient period. And so again, reading here, Kurt Rudolph, prominent German scholar, says that in this connection, it is also necessary to indicate that the part played by the Hellenistic mystery religions in the formation of Gnosis. It is well known that the organization of the Gnostic communities was not dissimilar to that of the mystery religions, i.e., again, a lot of these inebriating magical traditions that were using various substances. And again, we can always go back and point to even Vedic culture over in India, excuse me, with the inebriating god Soma, which we've now lost identity of. But we can see, and this is something that I argue in my research, that Max Weber talks about the sort of rationalizing process, and he argues that as society moves in a sort of evolutionary way, to use that framework, becomes more rationalized, the sort of shamanic, the animistic, the pagan moves into more priestly, more doctrinal, more formalized understandings. And as that happens, some of these exoteric, these public rituals of inebriation, maybe you'd see in a tribal setting, maybe you'd see with a shaman. Well, now they become shrouded in a mystery. They become part of the dark, the occult, the esoteric, because now they are only for those who are worthy for the mystery. And so these mystery cults, many were going on in the Hellenistic period. Most specifically, you have Eleusis and you have the Mithraic cults of Rome. I mean, Mithraism was so popular, it was, I forget what the percentage, but the majority of the Roman military were Mithraites. And that is going to then play into how the Knights Templar actually start to take on, embody many of these same Mithraic, psychoactive, sacramental forms of theology and religion in the medieval period. And if you read Albert Pike, The Morals and Dogma, if you read P.D. Newman's book, I forget what the exact name is, something to do with the psychedelic origins of Freemasonry, you'll see that they literally claim to go back through the Knights Templar, which then go back to the ancient inebriating and magical rituals of Eleusis itself. But Kurt Rudolph says, it is well known that the organization of the Gnostic communities was not dissimilar to that of the mystery religions. The basic ideas of the individual mystery religions, which were seldom summed up in a proper theology, i.e. the Egyptian mysteries of Isis, found a certain echo in Gnosis. They were expanded in a way favorable to Gnostic teaching, and so furthered its propagation, its so-called homily of the Nascenes. It is not impossible that specific traditions of the mystery religions found acceptance in certain Gnostic communities. The Ophites, of which we'll be talking a little bit about today, the Nascenes, traditions which encompass the common fate of the divinity and the faithful, which seek to realize salvation by cultic means, as was the aim of the mystery cults. It may be the same as the contribution allegedly made by Orphism, an ancient Greek theosophical school connected with the cult of Dionysius, which exerted its influence more in secret than public. And so Dionysius is really important because if you look at some of the Dionysian mystery cults, Dionysius and Bacchus, they were used for ritual and intoxication, where there were certain points where people would go get drunk, or they would use certain herbs or plants or inebriating substances for various reasons. And so this kind of sets the framework for these ancient traditions, right? And so we're going to be looking at some of the accusations by the church fathers, again, Irenaeus, Eusebius, Epiphanius, and Hippolytus, on what these Gnostic traditions were doing, how they were incorporating, distorting many of the teachings of the original tradition. And we'll see, arguably, one of the earliest of these traditions is the Simonians. that there is a Gnostic tradition attributed to Simon Magus, of which if you read the book of Acts, Simon Magus is the one who comes up to the apostles and really asks if he can purchase the rights to the Holy Spirit. That according to the book of Acts, that he sees the miracles that the apostles they're laying on hands, they're healing people, incredible things are happening before people's eyes, and he wants a little bit of that. Simon Magus was known as a great magician during that period, and so he asked, how much money you want? I want to get some of that Holy Spirit. And they condemn him, chastise him, send him away, and that's why the heresy of churches allowing anybody to be baptized based on a number. And again, I don't mean to point fingers anywhere, but look at maybe the Greek church, especially here in the United States. If you give them $150, well, you can get baptized. This is called Simonism. This is a heresy, going back to Simon Magus. But Simon, historically speaking, many scholars believe that Simon Magus, there's certain people that certainly question his identity in the book of Acts, but they claim that he went then and founded his own Gnostic tradition. And this is what some of the church fathers, as we read, they're going to also argue this, that Simon Magus, being kicked out basically by the apostles because he wanted to purchase the Holy Spirit, goes and founds his own tradition. And he actually becomes worshipped as a god. So Simon Magus apparently was able to perform certain feats of public magic to a point where he would actually form a cult. Simony. He would form a cult. Shout out Thomas Henderson. Simony is back. Exactly. He would form a cult that actually worship him and Helen of Troy as actual deities. And of course, there'd be a lot of, according to the church fathers, sexual practices here that would violate a traditional Christian ethic. So this kind of lays out some of the groundwork, and we will also look at, well, I'm just going to mention, we're not even going to look at it, but if you wanted to, again, for my own research, because I'm trying to look at and really, in my academic stuff, look at Gnosticism and find potential examples of the use of inebriating substances, that if you read one of the Gnostic Gospels here in the Nag Hammadi scriptures, known as the authoritative discourse, it has a really interesting presentation of a sort of mystical food that opens up the eye of the mind and allows people to see things they can't normally see, and that this mystical food nourishes one's soul. Again, can anybody prove definitively that nobody even knows what Gnostic group it comes from? But that text, the authoritative discourse, is certainly one that may be hinting at some of the accusations that we'll read by our church fathers, who claim that the use of sexual rituals, the use of inebriating substances, and certainly the use of magical ceremonies were common throughout many of these Gnostic groups. Now, a caveat, just for those who are scholastically minded and want to be naysayers, obviously many scholars have been very critical of what the church fathers say, claiming that it's a polemical work, which it is. It's an apologetic work trying to defend the what they perceive to be the Orthodox tradition away from a lot of these Gnostic heresies. And so many scholars say, well, we can't know for certain, did they do this? Did they do that? Is this something that they're just making up? Well, again, that's left for individual people to make up and come to their own conclusions. Obviously, those who are more Christian-minded may give more favorability to some of the church fathers than those who are more skeptical. Well, it's just fine. I just wanted to lay that out there. Again, just trying to be as accurate and scholastic as possible. Now, what's interesting is when the things that we'll read from Irenaeus, Eusebius, Epiphanius, and Hippolytus is many accusations that reemerge during the Inquisition. And so the Inquisition that goes to try to stamp out the Knights Templars, to try to stamp out the Cathars of southern France, that the accusations against the witches that are rubbing themselves with, most likely, generally believed by scholars, that the entire myth of witches flying is tied to the use of inebriating substances, whether ingested or rubbed upon the skin to enter into the bloodstream. that the witch flight is really just it's a reappropriation of shamanic flight. So if anybody's read Mircea Eliade's Shamanism, Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy, that's still sort of a central work on shamanism. It talks about the shamanic flight. There's a whole chapter talking about shamanic flight and how shamanic flight is part of almost all these shamanic traditions. And they access that through sort of alteration of consciousness, whether it be through herbs, plants, drugs, or whether it be through ritual, pain, sun dances, dancing in front of the sun, then till almost exhaustion, where, you can get into these altered states. So various self-flagellation, all this type of stuff. But what's interesting is in many of the accusations we might read tonight, they reemerge in the medieval period through the Inquisition. Now, could it be that they're just reiterating some of the polemical works of the church fathers regarding these Gnostic groups? Or is it that when we look at vegetarian, the refusal to eat meat is a big one? When you start reading all these different church fathers, this was one that is levied at the Gnostics over and over and over and over again, is that they won't eat meat. In that, unless there's some points where they don't eat meat, but on certain ritual occasions, then they really get into meat. But you certainly, what's interesting is if you dive into some of this, maybe you see some of the sort of spiritual sentiments within people nowadays that, and again, this is not for all of Gnostic groups, okay? You have to take it a step by step. Again, it's a very complicated group to talk about Gnosticism because it's multi-varied. But groups like the Carpocratians, the Borborites, the Simonians, certain types of Valentinians, the Ophites, that they were what's called libertine. And libertine are these people who actually want to transgress the moral norms as a form of liberation. And so if you're a Gnostic and you believe that the material body and materialism itself is all bad because it's created by ultimately the devil and their framework, well then defiling the body isn't necessarily a sin, because the body itself by definition is a defilement. It is a corruption created by the evil one. And so there are accusations of doing incredibly defiling things to the body. There's multiple accusations of, homosexuality, the ingestion of menstrual blood, semen, because these things are to represent the sort of fertility principles without actually having children. Because for a lot of Gnostic groups, to actually have children is a sin. And because that would be to bring in light the soul from the realm of the pleroma, the realm of pure light, and bring that into the physical matter and entrap it into the same scenario I'm entrapped in, you're entrapped in. And so a lot of them were not interested in having copulation. They weren't interested in copulating and having multiple children because from their tradition that looks as sinful. So they engaged in homoerotic, sodomy, different forms of sexual activity to avoid this. Now, also, there's incredibly ascetic groups of Gnostics, and that's what I'm saying. It's very multi-layered, and as we get in here, we're going to start in just a moment. We'll see that there's so many different groups. But we didn't even know about all these groups until 1945, and that's what this is, the Nag Hammadi scriptures. In Nag Hammadi, Egypt, it was found multiple codexes that go back to these Gnostic groups, because a lot of this work the early church burned. Now, this is one of the reasons the people who are much more sympathetic to the spiritual tradition of the Gnostics view orthodoxy and the church fathers, and certainly the church of the first millennium, as patriarchal, oppressive, domineering, destructive, and they destroyed a lot of the Gnostic scriptures. What we know is that somebody put all these things in a jar, many, many Gnostic scriptures that come from many, many different schools, and they were preserved miraculously and found in Nag Hammadi, Egypt. And I believe it was like a very, a lower person in society there, maybe like a farmer or something like that. They found all these, and they were actually burning some of these as to heat their own home there in Egypt. It wasn't until later they somebody came across and realized that they had all these scriptures. So there's some here that have been burned by the people, the family who found them in Nag Hammadi. But in 1945, we had access to all these different, there's 52, or there's 48 books in here. 48 books that are claiming to be of the disciples of Christ. Now, obviously, we have 4 Gospels in the canonical, in our canonical scripture, the Bible, which was done through the first 7 ecumenical councils, establishing the canon of the New Testament and the Old Testament, right? And so it wasn't until 1945. So works like this, which was this is right here is by G.R.S. Mead. He was actually a theosophist for a while, but this is right at the turn of the 20th century. So between the 19th and 20th century, he wrote this book called A Forgotten Faith. And this book right here is basically everything that was known or could be known about the Gnostic tradition before all their scriptures were found in Nag Hammadi. Okay? And so it's actually, I had to buy this from a library. This is a library book. That's why you can kind of see all the fadedness. You can actually still see this because this book's kind of hard to get your hands on. But it's very interesting, and he did a great job basically describing everything that could be known about the Gnostics from some of the polemical works that we're going to be looking at this evening. But he only had access to a few of these sort of Gnostic scriptures or Gnostic gospels. And so this is a very interesting book. Again, that comes from the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. But again, 1945 then, this revolutionizes the understanding of early Christianity, the plurality of schools, the multiple interpretations, many books in here people didn't even know about. The infancy gospels, there's many infancy gospels, all that type of stuff. So what we see then is that these Gnostic schools, one of the biggest things that differentiate it from orthodoxy is this privileging of esoteric knowledge, esotericism. And this is true, again, what the field of research that I do my scholarship in is Western esoteric traditions. I'm interested in the history of Western magic. And this has been a real fascination for me for a long time. Outside of God's providence, I didn't know that it would become, all that fascination would lead to a sort of apologetic work to some degree or another. But the Western esoteric traditions are all about the acquisition of esoteric knowledge, the same thing as acquiring gnosis. You can do it through different ways and different means. And so orthodoxy is very exoteric. So Orthodox Christianity does not claim to have any sort of esoteric or hidden or secretive teaching that Christ passed on. Within the Gnostics, you'll find multiple of them. For example, like Mary Magdalene was his wife, and that Mary Magdalene was the highest of the apostles, and that Mary Magdalene acquired all the true gnosis and the true teachings. Or there's another one in here called the Gospel of Judas, which claims that Judas was actually the highest of the apostles, and that's why Christ actually sought him out and asked him to turn him into the authorities. You have the Gospel of Thomas, which is representative of an entire community that claimed that they came from the Apostle Thomas. Now that is certainly questioned because we know that the Apostle Thomas went towards what we consider now India. And that's where the Christian community in India, they claim that they come from the Apostle Thomas. And according to church tradition, Thomas's relics were taken from India and brought to Italy. So I think they were in the Middle East there for a little bit. I forget how many years, maybe in Syria for a while. But then as Islam began to spread, eventually they were brought over to Italy. So based on church tradition and what even most scholars recognize is that the Thomas community of Alexandria, Egypt, is not actually tied to the Apostle Thomas, but they chose the Apostle Thomas because Didymus Thomas. He's the twin of Christ. He's the brother of Christ. He's like the dark esoteric teaching. You get the public Christ, but with the Thomas community, now you get the twin. You get the true esoteric teaching. You have the Valentinian school and all this different stuff, and we're going to dive into that here in a minute. But basically, all I'm trying to say is that Orthodox Christianity and a lot of these Gnostic schools were totally different paradigms. Totally different paradigms of understanding. And that's where when you look at a book like The Immortality Key by Mirarescu. It's a very popular book right now, basically claiming that the Christian Eucharist of the Western and Eastern Orthodox, Western Catholicism, Eastern Orthodox, is a sober doctrinal continuation of the Mithraic, of the Eleusinian, and of the Dionysian cults, which were using inebriating substances in a sacramental way. And so, obviously, if we look back at Eleusis, you figure out who Persephone and the sort of cycle of death and rebirth through this Eleusinian mystery, which a lot of people, a lot of scholars believe to be related to psychedelics. Therefore, if that is about immortality, when we then look at Christianity, we look at the Eucharist, that is also about immortality. That must just be a sober, exoteric representation of the psychedelic esoteric form. And I think what is more probable, based on my own research, is that it's an entirely different worldview. And so even though Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, is trying to address claims like the nature of death, what is immortality, death and rebirth? What is the Eucharist? How do we commune with the body of Christ? That it's answering and asking many of the exact same questions as these mystery religions, but it's a different paradigm in which how you go about doing that, because of the doctrine of sobriety that Christianity really gets from the Stoics, that inebriation isn't considered a virtue within this Orthodox framework. Sobriety is considered a virtue. And so the way you become immortal is to commune with the energies of God, the uncreated energies, different worldview. There is no dualism. Christ is fully God, fully man. Many of these Gnostic groups are going to deny Christ's divinity, or they're going to affirm Christ's divinity but deny his humanity. So we'll see a lot of these different heretical beliefs. And so to me, it's an entirely different worldview, that what is most likely is Gnosticism and magic and many of the inebriating cults, the mystery religions, is a sort of question. It's a process of asking. It's a religious search, asking many of the exact same questions that our Orthodox theology is trying to address. It's just the ways that they answer it are in very different ways, because they come from very different paradigms. And I think that's why when you start to look at mystery traditions across different cultures, historical periods, and geographies, looking at esoteric mystical practices from different geographies, histories, and cultures, that they all have way more similarities with each other. When you look at Gnostic or esoteric forms of Islam, and then you look at maybe inebriating esoteric Gnostic forms of Christianity, they have way more in common, really, than the dogmatic forms of religion they come from. So, anyways, that kind of sets then the premise of today's video and what we're going to be getting into. So with that being said, guys, smash that like. I hope everybody is going to enjoy tonight's conversation. There's going to be a lot of interest into all this different stuff. So guys, please smash that like if you can. I would greatly appreciate that. First thing I want to do for the housekeeping is let you know that we got new members only content over at the website. So if you guys have not, or you would like to support Church of the Eternal Logos, please, one of the best ways you could do so is to become a website member over at davidpatrickcarey.com/register. I got 2 new members only videos, one of which is me talking about a couple times of my own psychedelic experiences, in which I had an experience with prelest. I had a sort of spiritual delusion. I was convinced something was going to happen, and it did not work out that way. And so I have a couple stories about that, and then I have a really fun video. I think it's over an hour and 20 minutes or so. It's about mathematical challenges to Darwinian theory of evolution. And so it's dealing with a computer scientist, a mathematician, and a biologist, and looking at some of the statistical mathematical shortcomings of Darwinian theory that really is demonstrating that Darwinian theory, especially within the academy and the sort of contemporary scene of scholasticism, it's a sort of religion. It's really its own religion, and that's going to lead me to I want to do a stream on the holy trinity of atheism, Darwin, Marx, and Freud. But that's going to be a whole nother stream, but I think that would be a lot of fun, because all 3 of them are sort of asking ultimate questions that I think allows then a framework of, initial plausibility, although really Freud is the only one that's still going strong in regards to his usefulness in academic structures. Obviously the unconscious, things like that. You can disagree with other things of him. I mean, Marx is pretty much thrown away. I mean, people use sort of dialectical theories, material theories or whatnot for research. And then Darwin, the mathematical challenges to Darwinian theory, that members-only video, really highlights some really key things that I think are useful for people. So if that's something you'd be interested in, please become a website member, and I greatly appreciate that. Also, if anybody would be interested in signing up for a one-on-one session, you can do that with the following link. If you want to talk about theology or theories of magic or world religions or whatever it be, goal setting, fitness, you can do so by signing up for a one-on-one session. This Thursday is wide open, so if anybody would be interested in that, please sign up there. Also want to say that I'm going to be doing another members-only content, but it's going to be a bit of a controversial video, so that's why it's going to be just for members. It's not going to be a live stream here on YouTube, but we're going to be looking at potential esoteric theories about the Prophet Muhammad and the origins of Islam. Now, obviously, this is not a normative theory, but I've looked into it, and it has some interesting things to say. And so I'll just say it has to do with Salman al-Farsi. It has to do with the Prophet Muhammad and how some of the Quranic scripture and the whole Arab conquest of Persia got going and what exactly that might mean or insinuate about the true origins of Islam. So that's going to be another members-only video, but definitely sign up if that's something you'd be interested in. And then another thing is part of tonight's discussion is really just a section of my own research paper where I'm trying to trace the use of esoteric technologies for transcendence, drug practices from basically Eleusis through the entirety of Western civilization. And it's a preliminary paper. There's still a lot more that I want to get done with it, but if that's something you'd also like to read, that in a paper on metaphysics and Kant's influence on really the continental and the analytic schools of philosophy, that will also be up at the website soon. They're not up there yet, but I'm going to set those up so anybody can read those for purchase if they'd like to. Okay, with that being said, now let's just get into it. So first thing I want to do, guys, is talk and introduce a little bit about this topic of Gnosticism before we start reading some of the church fathers. So let me get over here so you can see me. So here is a little bit on the Nag Hammadi. This is what I was talking about. This is what this book is, this very important book that has all these different scriptures of these Gnostic communities, these various Gnostic cults and communities. And so you can see it was found in 1945, yada, yada, yada. Anyways, if you want to learn more, you can look into that. But then we have Gnosticism, and I want to go through some of these main groups because if you guys want, you can super chat or throw in terms you want me to command F some of these because I got all the online documents. This is one of the ways that I've been trying to use the church fathers for research is, I have Against the Heresies right here by Irenaeus. Here you can't see it because of that, but I have Against the Heresies by Irenaeus, but it's so much harder to find specific words, specific conversations on specific things in the book than on these online documents. So that's what we're going to be doing today is I'm just going to be command finding carpocrations, sex, all these different hot words, and then we can see what they're talking about. But I first just want to go through some of these early schools because just to show you that it's very, very diverse. And so obviously here's Gnosticism, again, 1st century AD, although this is debated, like some of the Ophites, for example. The Ophite school traces itself back to serpent worship well before Christianity. So contentious on when exactly this stuff gets started. But if we go down to the major movements here, so this is just Gnosticism on their Wikipedia. You'll see that the Syrian-Egyptian Gnosticism includes Sethianism, and obviously we know who Seth is within the Egyptian lore. So that's sort of the devil, right? It's the antagonistic figure to Osiris and Horus and that type of stuff. And so that plays an influence on Gnosticism because we have to know Gnosticism was thriving in places like Alexandria and Egypt back in the ancient period. I mean, tons of magic going on at that period. Anyway, schools such as Sethianism, Valentinianism, Basilidians, Thomasine traditions, serpent Gnostics, as well as a number of other minor groups and writers. Hermeticism is also a Western Gnostic tradition. That is true. So Hermeticism, the Corpus Hermeticum, that gets brought into the West through the fall of the Byzantine Empire. That's really the mark of modernity. So as the modern period gets established with the fall, the Turkish conquest, the Ottoman conquest of the Byzantine Empire, a lot of the Eastern scripts start flooding into Western Europe, and that's where they get Plato for the first time. Plato gets translated into Latin. That's why the scholasticism was so Aristotelian, because they had access to Aristotle. They didn't have Plato. But as the Byzantine Empire falls, Plato gets brought into the Latin and it started to get translated, but then all of a sudden the Hermetic corpus, all these texts regarding Hermes Trismegistus and Hermeticisms gets brought in, and they get translated immediately by Marsilio Ficino. And this launches the perennial spirituality and the process of ritual magic really in the modern period in Western civilization, and that is continuous all the way through Aleister Crowley into the 20th century. But anyways, I digress. Hermeticism is certainly another very important, and that got so people first thought Hermes Trismegistus was as old as Moses, and then it gets redated by Isaac Casaubon in the 17th century, and once he redates it and shows based on the philological, the linguistic evidence that there's no way this thing was written back, predating the Egyptian pharaohs and all this stuff, that this has to be at earliest 2nd century, and that's exactly what it is. It's actually the Corpus Hermeticum is newer than New Testament scripture. So that then changed everything. But anyways, it was a sort of Gnostic tradition as well. So though it differs in some respects, So the Syrian-Egyptian school derives much of its outlook from Platonist influence. It depicts creation and a series of emanations from a primordial mondadic source, finally resulting in the creation of the material universe. These schools tend to view evil in terms of matter that is markedly inferior to goodness and lacking spiritual insight and goodness rather than that as an equal force. Many of these movements use texts related to Christianity, with some identifying themselves as specifically Christian, though quite different from the Orthodox and Roman Catholic forms. Jesus and several of his apostles, such as Thomas the Apostle, claimed as the founder of the Thomasine form of Gnosticism, which, again, most scholars do not believe that to actually be the case, because the earliest scriptures, I think the earliest dating of the Gospel of Thomas is like mid-2nd century. Obviously, Thomas would well be dead, and according to church tradition, he's already been over to India, where he established Christianity over in India. So, anyways. So, figure in many Gnostic texts. Mary Magdalene is respected as a Gnostic leader and is considered superior to the 12 apostles. That's in such texts as the Gospel of Mary. John the Evangelist is claimed as a Gnostic by some Gnostic. Yeah, so some Gnostic schools would only read the Gospel of John, and then they had all these other texts to reinterpret it for you in a Gnostic worldview. As Gnostic interpreters, as is even St. Paul. Most of the literature from this category is known to us through the Nag Hammadi Library, which is exactly this book right here. So then you have the Sethite and Barbeloite school. So Sethianism is one of the main currents in Gnosticism during the 2nd and 3rd centuries, and the prototype of Gnosticism as condemned by Irenaeus. And so that's what I got right here. Irenaeus, and we're going to look again. We can put if you guys want to look at the Sethian schools, let me know. There's too much to get into for tonight, so I want to show you some of the Carpocratians and some of the Borborites stuff. But if there's any particular Gnostic school that you're interested in, super chat me and we'll word find it, and you tell me which father or all the fathers that you want to look at, but we'll look it up. But Sethianism is certainly one of the dominant trends. Sethianism attributed its gnosis to Seth, third son of Adam and Eve, and Norea, wife of Noah, who also plays a role in Mandaeanism and Manichaeanism. Mandaeanism is a tradition who claims that they are the true Gnostic source is coming from John the Baptist. They claim to be a sort of esoteric tradition actually developed by John the Baptist, the Mandaeans. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of them. You can look that up. It's the only Gnostic group that still exists, although the war in Iraq radically destroyed any remnants of them left. But if you guys want to look this up, here I'll put the link in the live stream. But they're really the only Gnostic group that still exists from antiquity. They're called the Mandaeism, and they believe that they come from the John the Baptist. And then you have Manichaeanism, which is going to play prominent in our conversation because Mani, the Persian founder of Manichaeanism, was a magician in certain things, but they had a reputation of using inebriating substances in ritualistic forms, and they also have multiple accusations, even outside the church fathers, of participating in orgiastic activity and using inebriating substances, even based on records found in China, because the Uyghurs, the Uyghur Muslims, they actually were, the official religion of them for a while was actually Manichaeanism. And so Manichaeanism, there's references even as far as China, which claimed that they would eat tons and tons of mushrooms and eat red mushrooms in a ritualistic way. Is that the Amanita muscaria mushroom? Very potentially it could have been. And so their main text was the Apocryphon of John, which does not contain Christian elements and is an amalgam of two earlier myths. Earlier texts, such as the Apocalypse of Adam, show signs of pre-Christian and focus on Seth, the third son of Eve. Later Sethian texts continue to interact with Platonism. Sethian texts, such as Zostrianos and Allogenes, draw on the imagery of older Sethian texts, but utilize, quote, a large fund of philosophical conceptuality derived from contemporary Platonism, that is, Middle Platonism, with no traces of Christian content. So that is the Sethian school. Then we have Samaritan Baptist sects. This is, again, the Mandaeans, for example, but according to Magris, Samaritan Baptist sects were an offshoot of John the Baptist, i.e. the Mandaeans. One offshoot was in turn headed by Dosithios, Simon Magus, and Menander. It was in this milieu that the idea emerged that the world was created by ignorant angels. Their baptismal ritual removed the consequences of sin and led to the regeneration by which natural death, which was caused by these angels, was overcome. The Samaritan leaders were viewed as the, quote, embodiment of God's power, spirit, and wisdom, as the redeemer and revealer of, quote, true knowledge. Again, gnosis. You see this emphasis, there's this there's serious emphasis on knowledge and gnosis. And then you have the Simonians were centered around Simon Magus, and this is one of the groups that I actually want to talk a little bit about today. We'll read some of their stuff because there's I forget which church father. I want to say actually I don't even want to say. I know I'll be wrong, but one of them talks very interestingly about some of the sexual rituals and practices of the Simonians. The Simonians were centered around Simon Magus, the magician baptized by Philip and rebuked by Peter in Acts 8, who became in early Christianity an archetypal false teacher. The ascription by Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, and others of a connection between schools in their time and individuals in Acts 8 may be as legendary as the stories attached to him in various apocryphal books. Justin Martyr identifies Menander of Antioch as Simon Magus. According to Hippolytus, Simonianism is an earlier form of Valentinian doctrine. And so Valentinus was actually, so the entirety history of Christianity was almost changed when Valentinus, the founder of the Valentinian school, he almost became the second bishop of Rome. The second bishop of Rome. Now, of course, that didn't happen, but he had a whole Gnostic school in Alexandria, Egypt. Anyways, considering on here, because we're running out of time, there's so much content. Here's Valentinianism. I'll just read it real quick. Valentinianism was named after its founder, Valentinus, who was a candidate for Bishop of Rome, but started his own group when another was chosen. Valentinianism flourished after mid-2nd century. The school was popular, spreading into northwest Africa and Egypt and through Asia Minor and Syria to the east. And Valentinus is especially named as Gnostikos by Irenaeus. It was an intellectually vibrant tradition with an elaborate and philosophically dense form of Gnosticism. Valentinus students elaborate on his teachings and materials, and several varieties of their central myth are known. So it's generally believed that the Valentinian school was much more philosophical. They were attempting to be much more established than some of these other cults. Here's the Thomasine traditions. Again, refers to texts like the Gospel of Thomas, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, Then you have Marcion. We all know Marcionism, right? Marcion was a church leader from Sinope in Turkey who preached in Rome around 150 AD, but was expelled and started his own congregations, which spread throughout the Mediterranean. He rejected the Old Testament and followed a limited Christian canon, which included only a redacted version of Luke and 10 edited letters of Paul. Some scholars do not consider him to be a Gnostic, but his teachings clearly resemble some Gnostic teachings. He preached a radical difference between the God of the Old Testament, the demiurge, the creator of the material universe, and the highest God, the loving spiritual God, who is the Father of Jesus, who had sent Jesus on earth to free mankind from the tyranny of the Jewish law. Like the Gnostics, Marcion argued that Jesus was essentially a divine spirit appearing to men in the shape of a human form and not someone who had a true physical body. Marcion held that the Heavenly Father was an utterly alien God, and he had no part in making the world nor any connection with it. And so you can see, again, based on these Platonic presuppositions, why they don't want Jesus to have a body. Because if Jesus is coming from the pure realm of pure light, of pure good, of pure divinity, well, everything physical is bad because it's created by the devil. Now, orthodoxy is collapsing dialectics, right? That's a key feature of orthodox theology, is collapsing dialectics. Now, here's a few of the groups that I really want to focus on tonight and that we're going to dive into right now. And that is these other Gnostic groups. Some of the ones we just mentioned are kind of the mainstream of Gnostic groups. But the Serpent Gnostics, the Nassines, the Ophites, and the Serpentarians, again, we're going to be talking a little bit about them, gave prominence to snake symbolism and snake handling, played a role in their ceremonies. Well, again, we're going to read an example here according to Tertullian, where they would literally consecrate the Eucharistic bread by taking a snake out of its and holder, and they would have the snake lick the bread. And once the snake licked the Eucharistic bread, now it was consecrated. Now it was divinized. Now you could participate in this sort of sacramental. You see how they use a lot of the semiotics of Christianity, and now they could participate in the Eucharistic activity. Cerinthius, the founder of heretical school with Gnostic elements, like a Gnostic, Cerinthius depicted Christ as a heavenly spirit separate from the man, Jesus, and he cited the demiurge as creating the material world. Unlike the Gnostics, Cerinthius taught Christians to observe the Jewish law. His demiurge was holy, not lowly, and he taught the second coming. His gnosis was a secret teaching attributed to an apostle. Some scholars believe that the first epistle of John was written in response to Cerinthius. The Canaanites. The Canaanites are so named by Hippolytus of Rome, which we're going to read Hippolytus of Rome, Refutation to All Heresies. That's one of the ones we're going to be looking at. The Canaanite is used as the name of a religious movement and not, by Hippolytus of Rome, they worship Cain, as well as Esau, Korah, and the Sodomites. There is little evidence concerning the nature of this group. Hippolytus claims that they believed in the indulgence of sin was key to salvation because since the body is evil, one must defile it through immoral activities, libertinism. The name Canaanite was used as the name of a religious movement and not in the use of a biblical sense of people descended from Cain. And so again, this term libertine right here is going to be important. Libertine is a person devoid of moral principles or goes directly in opposition to sexual restraint or typical moral foundings, right? So we're going to see that is common with a lot of these groups. Right here, the Corpocratians, a libertine sect following the gospel according to the Hebrews. The school of Justin, which combined Gnostic elements with ancient Gnostic religion. The Borborites, a libertine Gnostic sect said to be descended from the Nicolaitans. Okay, so Manichaeans, all this different stuff. So now we get a lot of that. So before we dive into the actual church fathers and what they're saying, I want to read just a few things then on heretical Gnostic Eucharist. This is by Carl A.P. Ruck. classicist over at Boston University, and has done a lot of work regarding the use of psychedelics in the ancient period. So here's some heretical Eucharists and just a general description of some of these Gnostic activities, which I want to focus on today. If anybody wants to focus on anything else, send me a super chat and let me know. Without any of the canonic scriptures yet set in place, we'll just skip that. Hippolytus of Rome, who himself fell foul of the church and was a rival of the Pope and the second bishop of Rome, in his refutation of all heresies, traced the origin of the Ophites, which again we even found Kurt Rudolph connect the Ophites back to the mystery schools of ancient period, as an Egyptian Gnostic sect named for the Ophis or snake, and probably similar to a group labeled as the Sethians, for the ass-headed brother of Osiris, who honored the serpent in the Garden of Eden, and whence were the origin of the tradition that would survive into the medieval age as the doctrine of the Felix Culpa. In their celebration of the Eucharist, it was reported that they caused a serpent to lick the bread as to import its essence to the host and even extend the fraternal kiss to the holy reptile. This is according to Tertullian and Epiphanius, and then there's a few other sources there. As with all these heresies, the accounts are very confused and obscure and not in the least unbiased. Certainly, again, this is coming from academic secular scholars. They question, again, what the church fathers had to say. But Hippolytus claimed that the sect derived from James, the brother of Jesus. So we're going to disregard that. Versions of the Ophite heresy actually ended up in parts such as Armenia and Syria. Then you have the Valentinian school. Within the Valentinian school, there was a gentleman named Marcus, and so we're going to read about Marcus. So Marcus, one of the Valentinian charismatics, was responsible for the Marcion heresy, administered the Eucharist wine to wealthy women in such large doses that they became deranged and apparently granted him access to their bridal chamber, receiving his luminous seed. And that's some of the church fathers say this exact thing as well. The Carpocratians, who is a group that I'm very much interested in, were even more explicit. At their agape feast, they extinguished the lamps and committed sexual intercourse as a divine duty, a promiscuous orgy, preferably without one's wedded spouse, both heterosexual and homosexual, citing Christ present with the boy who ran naked from Gethsemane without his loincloth after lying with the body of the Lord. So you can see the Carpocratians made an explicit statement regarding the homosexuality of Jesus Christ. And they participated in, I believe that they participated in potentially some of the inebriating, sorcerer-like use of pharmakia, of inebriating substances, but we know that they did have aberrant sexual activities. The Borborites may be the same sect, pejoratively named generically as the Filth Eaters, as also known by regional names. They made their Eucharist upon the menses, or menstrual blood, and ejaculated semen from masturbation or withheld from intercourse. And if perchance in the coitus interruptus failed, meaning sex that you're supposed to stop before ejaculating, so you're supposed to pull out because obviously within the Gnostic traditions, having children is deemed a bad thing, that they consumed the aborted fetus from any accidental resulting pregnancies. These Gnostic sects saw physical procreation as a sinful encasement of light and matter, whereas sexual ecstasy without conception was a divine experience. And to this end, they encouraged all forms of coupling, male and female, especially not culminating in successful insemination. Of particular significance is the fact that they equated their filthy Eucharist with the tree and the fruit with the tree in Eden. And so then you look at some of the filthy things. You can look at Siberian shamanism and that they drink urine, for example. They drink urine, and this is because if you take Amanita muscaria, Amanita muscaria mushrooms that has muscimol, and it can be toxic. Obviously, you have to let them dry, all this different stuff. The ebotenic acid is what you're actually getting inebriated from. And so if you drink the urine of somebody who's already ate the mushrooms, you can get just as inebriated without the toxins. And this is why there's a tradition in Siberian shamanism of drinking the urine of reindeer, also the reindeer drinking the urine of shamans, and vice versa. Interestingly, the claim of drinking urine reemerges with the Cathars, a Gnostic group that finds its presence in southern France during the medieval period. And so even this scholar is trying to make the case that could it be possible that they're actually continuing the filthy Eucharist, this filthy practice? The reason why the Borborites, and that's a pejorative term to talk about the filth eaters, is because they have a ritual activity of potentially drinking urine. And so talking about such activities, that such heresies persisted in Byzantium and the Orient and were repeatedly reinvented under the names of new charismatic evangelists. They spread westward into medieval Europe, where they were persecuted by the Church of Rome as such heretical groups as the Albigensians, the Cathars, and the Manichaeans. They brought with them the filthy sacrament of the divine effluence like urine, and a secret fruit from the tree that Abulafia saw in his ecstatic meditation upon Jacob's journey. And so the last of their leaders was executed in 1310, with their scriptures destroyed, although the religion persisted in remote areas under the other names into the 14th and 15th centuries in France and Germany. And then here's Mani with the Manichaeans. The charismatic prophet who founded the Manichaean sect was a magus, or Zoroastrian priest named Mani, Latinized as Manichaeus. From the marshlands at the mouth of the Euphrates and Tigris River of Mesopotamia, who died around 272, the cult was syncretistic and claimed Buddha and Jesus along with Zoroaster as their prophets. St. Augustine was himself a member of the sect for a while, and he described the Eucharistic meal reserved only for the elite as consisting of mushrooms. The cult spread to China, where its night-long agape feast included magic, drugs, rites of sexual obscenity, and were officially banned in 732 for the same suspicion of revolutionary political foment that brought the Christian Eucharist to the attention of the Council of Pliny, of the proconsul Pliny, but the religion continued for sporadic periods. Then he talks about how the Knights Templar, as mentioned before, were accused of urinating on the crucifix and obscene sexual rites of initiation. A grave of a Templar in Germany has revealed that the knight was buried with one of the Ophite talismanic seals. Although the last of their leaders was executed in 1314, many escaped and were reabsorbed into the military knighthoods and fled primarily to Scotland, where their tradition survived in Freemasonry. Okay, so now with all that being said, let's get into some of this stuff. So here is, let's open up Irenaeus. Let's see, why is that not coming up? Irenaeus, let's see. Okay, there's Eusebius. Why isn't Irenaeus popping up? Okay, let's just remove it and reopen it. So Irenaeus, and he has his most famous one, Against All Heresies, or Against Heresies, rather. So let's start with Irenaeus here. Okay. There we go. Okay, let's transform, fit the screen, bada bing, bada boom. All right. So here is the section of him talking about Marcus. Remember, Marcus is the one that was giving wine to women. This was accused in sleeping with married women. That Marcus, one of the interesting things about him is that they were trying to, their goal was to get non-Gnostic people to be a part of their rituals, where other people obviously want Gnostics, there's a secret initiation, and so once you're in, then they participate in certain rituals. Marcus was one going out and trying to find people. And so here, I want to actually search for Carpocratians. Here we go. Doctrines of the Carpocrates, book 25. Doctrines of Carpocrates. So Carpocrates, again, and his followers maintain that the world and all things are within were created by angels greatly inferior to the unbegotten Father. They also hold that Jesus was the son of Joseph, and it was other men. He was just like other men, with the exception that he differed from them in the respect inasmuch as his soul was steadfast and pure. He perfectly remembered those things which he had witnessed within the sphere of the unbegotten God. Sound familiar? Does it sound like any New Age activity? Right? You can imagine some of the New Agers say exactly that. On this account, a power descended upon him from the Father. By the means of it, he might escape from the creators of this world. And they say that in the passing through them, all remaining points free ascended again to him and to the powers which they same way embrace like things to itself. They further declare that the soul of Jesus, although educated in the practices of the Jews, regarded these with contempt, and that for this reason he was endowed with faculties, by means of which he destroyed those passions which dealt in men as a punishment for their sins. We're going to get into the magic. Let's skip over here to part 3. They practice also magical arts and incantations, philters also, and love potions, and have recourse to familiar spirits, dream-sending demons, and other abominations, declaring that they possess power to rule over even now the princes and formers of this world, and not only them, but also all things that are in it. These men, even as the Gentiles, have been sent forth by Satan to bring dishonor upon the church, so that, in one way or another, men hearing the things which they speak and imagining, that we all are such as they may turn away from their ears from the preaching of the truth, or, again, seeing the things they practice, may speak evil of us all, who have in fact no fellowship with them, either in doctrine or in morals, or in our daily conduct. But they had a licentious life, and to conceal their impious doctrines, they abused the name of Christ as a means of hiding their wickedness, so that their condemnation is just, Romans 3:8, when they receive from God a recompense suited to their works. So again, this is Irenaeus, guys. This is Irenaeus for anybody. Let me make this bigger. Is it harder to see? Is that easier? What if I make this bigger? If I make that bigger and then this smaller? Is that easier to read, guys? So, next one, number 4. Section 4 here. So unbridled is their madness, that they declare they have in their power all things which are irreligious and impious, and are at liberty to practice them. For they maintain that things are evil or good, simply in virtue of human opinion. They deem it necessary, therefore, that by means of transmigration from body to body, souls should have experience of every kind of life as well as every kind of action, unless indeed, by a single incarnation, one may be able to prevent any need for others by once and for all, and with equal completeness, doing all things which we dare not for others. We dare not either speak or hear of, nay, which we must not even conceive in our thoughts, nor think credible. If any of such thing is mooted among these persons who, for our fellow citizens, in order that, as their writings express it, their souls, having made trial of every kind of life, may at their departure not be wanting in any particular, it is necessary to assist upon this, lest on an account of some one thing being still wanting to their deliverance. So you can see again, because of their doctrine of good and evil, you become illuminated, Gnostic. You gain gnosis through the variety of experiences you have. So you see something like this even akin to Thelema, with Aleister Crowley advocating for, sodomy, and being sodomized by another man actually acquires magical power because you transgress those boundaries. So, so you can see, not too different. We can picture people in the contemporary period that have conceptions of good and evil, or even conceptions of spiritual enlightenment, which they say, oh, well, enlightenment comes from personal experience. It's because I've done X, Y, Z, I've seen X, Y, Z, and therefore I'm enlightened. Well, the Carpocratians, I think, are a really interesting Gnostic group, because they definitely believe that in their understanding of essentially relativism. And if the world is relative, then the only thing, which is ironic, because then there's an objective Gnostic spiritual knowledge that liberates you, but you gain that Gnostic knowledge through various experiences, which again, we saw Carl A.B. Ruck highlight instances of homosexuality. And we'll look at some of the other church fathers and how they talk about the Carpocratians. So, while you are with the adversary in the way, give all diligence, that you may be delivered from him, lest he give you up to the judge, and the judge surrender you to the officer, and he cast you into prison. Verily I say to you, you shall not go out thence until you pay the very last farthing. Matthew 5:25-6, Luke 12:58-59. They also declare the adversary is one of those angels who are in the world, whom they call the devil, maintaining that he was formed for this purpose, that he might lead those souls which have perished from the world to the supreme ruler. They describe him as also as being chief among the makers of the world. Luciferianism. And maintain that he delivers such souls, as has been mentioned, to another angel, who ministers to him, that he may shut them up in other bodies, for they declare that the body is the prison. Again, they interpret these expressions, you shall not go out thence until you pay the very last farthing, as meaning that no one can escape from the power of those angels who made the world, and that he must pass from body to body until he has experience of every kind of action which can be practiced in this world. And when nothing is longer wanting to him, then his liberated soul should soar upwards to the God who is above the angels, the makers of the world. In this way also all souls are saved, whether their own, which guarding against all delay participate in all sorts of actions during one's incarnation, or those again who by passing from body to body are set free on fulfilling and accomplishing what is requisite in every form of life into which they are sent, so that at length they shall no longer be shut up in the body. So again, very interesting stuff, right? That the way that you liberate, the way that you attain the gnosis to be freed is by having experiences of every kind imaginable. And thus, if ungodly, unlawful, and forbidden actions are committed among them, I can no longer find ground for believing them to be such. And in their writings, we read as follows the interpretation which they give of their views, declaring that Jesus spoke in a mystery to his disciples and apostles privately, and they requested and obtained permission to hand down these things thus taught to them, to others who should be worthy in believing. We are saved indeed by means of faith and love, but all other things, while in their nature indifferent, are reckoned by the opinion of men, some good and some evil, there being really nothing evil in nature then. So you see, a pure relativism, and in this relativistic spirituality, one attains gnosis, one attains liberation by all types of experiences. Again, we've talked about homosexuality, orgiastic activity, and drugs most likely being part of this. Others of them employ outward marks regarding their disciples inside the lobe of the right ear. So it was known that the Carpocratians would brand somebody on their right earlobe. From among those, also Marcellinia, who came to Rome under the episcopate of Anicetus, and holding these doctrines, she led multitudes astray. They style themselves Gnostics. They also possess images, some of them painted, others formed from different kinds of material, while they maintain that a likeness of Christ was made by Pilate. At the time when Jesus lived among them, they crowned these images and set them up among along with the images of philosophers of the world, that is to say, the images of Pythagoras and Plato and Aristotle and the rest. They have also other modes of honoring these images after the same manner of the Gentiles. Interesting. So that's the Carpocratians. That's Irenaeus. Let's see what Eusebius says. So here, we're going to close Irenaeus for a second. Bam. Let's open Eusebius. And so here is Eusebius. Oh, that's Epiphanius. Let me find Eusebius. Here's Eusebius. And so here's Eusebius on Simon Magus, which is really interesting because he claims basically they were having ritual libations, so some type of ritual beverage. But let's see if Eusebius have anything on the Carpocratians. There it is. Okay, let's see. First one is a footnote. He's got anything more than that? Footnote. There we go. Let's go to the next one. So this is in what exactly? This is Eusebius talking about the persons that became at the time leaders of knowledge falsely called. So this is Eusebius on church. So Eusebius is church history. This is what this comes from. Eusebius is church history for those of you who want to know. And so it's talking about various church leaders, these Gnostic leaders. As the churches throughout the world were now shining like the most brilliant stars, and our faith in the Savior and Lord Jesus Christ was flourishing among the whole human race, the demon who hates everything that is good and is always hostile to the truth and most bitterly opposed to the salvation of man, turned all his arts against the church. In the beginning, he armed himself against it with external persecutions. But now, being shut off from the use of such means, he devised all sorts of plans and employed other means in his conflict with the church, using base and deceitful men as instruments for the ruin of souls and as ministers of destruction, instigated by him, impostors and deceivers, assuming the name of our religion, brought to the depth of ruin such of the believers as they could win over, and at the same time, by means of the deeds which they practiced, turned away from the path which lead to the word, the logos of salvation, those who were ignorant of the faith. Accordingly, they proceeded from the Menanders, so that's the Mendaeans, whom they have already mentioned as the successor of Simon, a certain serpent-like power, double-tongued and two-headed, which produced the leaders of two different heresies, Saturnius and Antiochian by birth, and Basilides in Alexandrian. The former of these established schools of godless heresy in Syria and later in Alexandria. Irenaeus states that the false teaching of Saturnius agreed in most respects with that of Menander, but that Basilides, under the pretext of unspeakable mysteries, invented monstrous fables and carried the fictions of his impious heresies quite beyond bounds. But as there was at the time many members of the church who were fighting for the truth and defending apostolic and ecclesiastical doctrine with uncommon eloquence, so there were some that furnished posterity through their writings with the means of defense against such heresies. Of these, there are some that came down as the most powerful refutation of Basilides by Agrippa Castor, one of the most renowned writers of the day, which shows the terrible imposture of the man. While exposing his mysteries, he says that Basilides wrote 24 books upon the gospel, and that he invented prophets for himself named Barkabas and Barkoph, and others that had no existence, and that he gave them barbarous names in order to amaze those who marvel at such things. And he taught also that the eating of meat offered to idols and the unguarded renunciation of the faith in times of persecution were matters of indifference, and that he enjoyed upon his followers, like Pythagoras, a silence of 5 years. Other similar things that were mentioned by writers has been recorded concerning Basilides and has ably exposed the error of heresy. Irenaeus also writes that the Carpocrates was a contemporary of these men, and that he was the father of another heresy, of the Gnostics, which did not wish to transmit any longer the magic of Simon as the one had done in secret, but openly, for they boasted as something great of love potions that were carefully prepared by them, and for certain demons that sent the dreams and lent them their protection, and of other similar agencies. And in accordance with these things, they taught that it was necessary for those who wished to enter fully into the mysteries, or rather into their abominations, and to practice all the worst kinds of wickedness on the ground that they could escape the cosmic powers, as they called them in no other way, they discharging their obligations to them by an infamous conduct. Thus it came to pass that the malignant demon, making use of these ministries, on the one hand enslaved those who were so pitiably led astray by them to their own destruction, while on the other hand he furnished to the unbelieving heathen abundant opportunities for slandering the divine word, inasmuch as the reputation of these men brought infamy upon the whole race of Christians. In this way it came to pass that there was spread abroad in regard to us among the unbelievers of that age the infamous and most absurd suspicion that was practiced unlawful commerce with mothers and sisters, and enjoyed impious feasts. All right. Anyways, let's go back to Simon. He has a really interesting thing on Simon Magus. Here we go. Simon Magus. So again, Simon Magus from the book of Acts, right? And so he talks about how this is stated by Justin, one of the distinguished writers who lived not long after the time of the apostles. Concerning him, I shall speak in proper place. Take the read of this man to his first apology. Okay. Where is... Maybe it wasn't... Oh, here it is. Starting with 6. We have understood that Simon was the author of all heresy. For his time down to the present, those who followed his heresy have feigned the sober philosophy of the Christians, which is celebrated among all on account of its purity of life. But they nevertheless have embraced again superstitions of idols, which they seem to renounce, and they fall down before pictures and images of Simon himself, and of the above-mentioned Helena of Troy, who was with him, and they venture to worship them with incense and sacrifices and libations, which I suppose that libation could be probably psychoactive in one way or another. But those matters which they keep more secret than these, in regard to which they say that one, upon first hearing them, would be astonished if you heard what they were doing, and to use one of the written phrases in vogue among them would be confounded, and in truth full of amazing things, and of madness and folly such that it would be impossible not only to commit them to writing, but also for modest men even to utter them with the lips, on account of their excessive baseness and lewdness. For whatever could be conceived, the viler of the vilest things, all that has been outdone by the most abominable sect, which is composed of those who make sport of these miserable females that they overwhelmed with all kinds of vices. Let's look over here at, this is Eusebius. So let's get out of Eusebius. This is Epiphanius. Oh, this is Epiphanius' book. That is Epiphanius' book 2. I also have book 1. Let's see. This one. Do we want to look at the Carpocratians again? Again, you guys, tell me what you guys would like to look at. Let me pull up Let me pull up book 1 here. Okay. There we go. Okay. So this is book 1. Let me go over here to book 1. Oh, that's not it. Got so many up. Okay. Here we go. Here's book 1. And so, thank you very much, Thomas. Let me throw that alert above this. So here is on whoring and drunkenness. Let's see, what section is this on? This is against Gnostics or Borborites. So Borborites, those are the ones who were accused of, remember, eating menstrual and semen as a Eucharistic sacrament. The Borborites, which was really it's a pejorative term to describe them as filth eaters. So most likely that's not what they called themselves, I'm sure. But this is Epiphanius in section 2 of book 1. And that is called the Panarion. I don't know if you guys are familiar. If you look up Epiphanius, the Panarion, you'll find what it is we're looking at right here. But he's talking about the Borborites. And so let's just move through here. I'm not going to read the whole thing. He's talking about their leader, the foolish visions and proof text. Here we go. This is where it starts to get good. Although they have sex with each other, they renounce procreation. It is for enjoyment, not procreation, that they eagerly pursue seduction. Since the devil is mocking people like these and making fun of the creature fashioned by God, they come to climax, but absorb the seeds of their dirt, not by implanting them for procreation, but by eating the dirty stuff themselves. But even though one should accidentally implant the seed of his natural emission prematurely and the woman becomes pregnant, listen to a more dreadful thing that such people venture to do. They extract the fetus at the stage which is appropriate for their enterprise, take this aborted infant and cut it up in a trough with pestle. And they mix honey, pepper, and certain other perfumes and spices with it to keep from getting sick. Then all the revelers in this herd of swine and dogs assemble, and each eats a piece of the child with its fingers. And now, after this cannibalism, they pray to God and say, "We are not mocked by the archon of lust, but have gathered the brothers' blunder up. And this, if you please, is the idea of perfect Passover." And they are prepared to do a number of other dreadful things. Again, whenever they feel excitement within them, they soil their own hands with their own ejaculated dirt, get up and pray stark naked with their hands defiled. The idea is that they, quote, can obtain freedom of access to God by the practice of this kind. A man and woman, they pamper their bodies night and day, anointing themselves, bathing, feasting, spending their time in whoring and drunkenness. And they curse anyone who fasts and say fasting is wrong. Fasting belongs to this archon who made the world. We must take nourishment to our bodies strong and able to render their fruit in its season. In its season. They both use the Old and New Testaments, but renounce the speaker in the Old Testament, and whenever they find the text any sense of which they cannot be against, sense of which can be against them, they say that this has been said by the spirit of the world. But if a statement can be represented as resembling their lust, not as the text is, but as their deluded minds take it, they twist it to fit their lust and claim that it has been spoken by the Spirit of truth. And this, they claim, is what the Lord said of John, quote, What went ye out into the wilderness for to see a reed shaken with the wind, unquote. John was not perfect, they say. He was inspired by many spirits, like a reed stirring in every wind. And when the spirit of the archon came, he would preach Judaism. But when the Holy Spirit came, he would speak that of Christ. And this is the meaning of, quote, he that is least in the kingdom, and so on. He said of us, they say, because the least of us is greater than he. Such persons are silenced at once by the truth itself, for from the context of each saying the truth will be plainly shown and the trustworthiness of the text demonstrated. If John had worn soft clothing and lived in a king's house, saying fit would him exactly and be in direct refutation of him, but if went, okay, the translation's a little bit wonky here. What went ye out for to see? Okay, that's the same thing I said. And John was not such a man, then saying accusation cannot John, whose reference to those who expected to find John. Okay, anyways. So you really interesting stuff, right? So let's go just search sex. Here we go. So here's the first one. This is on, who's he talking about? He's in section 2. Oh, against the Nicolaitans. So here's against the Nicolaitans. They're talking about instead desiring to return like a dog to its vomit. He kept looking for poor excuses and inventing them in defense of his own intemperate passion. Being ashamed and repenting would have done him more good than failing of his purpose. He simply began having sex with his wife. But because he was ashamed of this defeat and suspected that he had been found out, he ventured to say, unless one copulates every day, he has no part in eternal life. For he had shifted from one pretense to the other. Seeing that his wife was unusually beautiful, yet bore herself with modesty, he envied her. And supposing that everyone was lascivious as he began constantly being offensive to his wife and making certain slanderous charges against her in speeches. And at length he degraded himself not only to normal sexual activity, but to blasphemous opinion, the harm of perverse teaching and deceit, and covert indoctrination of wickedness. So then he ties them to the Levitikites, the Borborites, and the rest, because we know the Borborites were into some weird stuff. Guys, if you have anything you want me to search here, just let me know. Let's see another one here. Who's he talking about here? This is against the Borborites. Okay, I think we just read this section. What about another one? Okay, here's one. Let's dive into this one. This is still on the general. So this is a general overview of different Gnostic sects. And he says, those who are called the Fabianites offer their shameful sacrifices of fornication, which I have already mentioned here in 365. So this is a citation he's referring back to. Names which have been invented themselves as names of supposed archons, making fools of their female partners and saying, quote, have sex with me so that I may offer you to the archon, unquote. And at each act of intercourse, they pronounce an outlandish name of one of their fictitious archons and pray, if you please, by saying, I offer this to thee, so-and-so, that thou mayest offer it to so-and-so. But at another act, he supposes again that he is likewise offering it to another archon, so that he too may offer it to the other. And until he mounts, or rather sinks through 365 falls of copulation, he calls on some name at each and does the same sort of thing. Then he starts back down through the same acts, performing the same obscenities and making fools of his female victims. Now, when he reaches a mass as great as that of a total number of 730 falls, I mean the falls of unnatural unions and the names that have made up, then finally a man of this sort, the hardihood to say, I am Christ, for I have descended from on high through the names of all 365 archons. Wow. Wow. Here's another one. Who's he talking about here? Yeah. Anyways, we can go on to Hippolytus too real quick. Let's see what Hippolytus has got. So here's, let's Epiphanius. This is all Epiphanius. We'll go to Hippolytus. Here's Hippolytus. Why is that not working? Same thing happened with Irenaeus. Let me remove it and then open it up again. So you can see, reading some of these church fathers in their polemical works against the Gnostics, pretty interesting. I think it's pretty interesting. Again, there's a lot going on here for sure. Okay, here we go. Here's Hippolytus. Transform, fit the screen. Bam. Okay. So, I guess, what do you guys want to look up? We can look up all types of stuff. You want to look up Carpocratians? See the heresy of Carpocrates. Marcion, his dualism. Or we can look up. Here's Carpocrates. Carpocrates affirms that the world and the things in it were made by angels. For example, what's really interesting is Hippolytus actually right in the introduction to his work. This is the refutation of all heresies. Hippolytus makes straight away claims that these Gnostic groups are continuations of ancient mystery pagan traditions, which is pretty interesting. So if you want, we can look at, Carpocrates, or we can look at sexual obscenities. Here's one. So the Cassis mode of administering baptism. So to those then who have been orally instructed by him, he dispenses baptism in this manner, addressing to his dupes some such words as the following, quote, "If therefore, my children, one shall have intercourse with any sort of animal whatsoever, or a male or a sister or a daughter, or hath committed adultery, or been guilty of fornication, and is desirous of obtaining remission of sins, from the moment that he hearkeneth to the book, let him be baptized a second time in the name of the great and most high God, and in the name of his Son, the mighty King. And by baptism he let him be purified and cleansed, and let him adjure." I'm actually not familiar with this particular group. Anyways, guys, tell me if you want anything to me to look up specifically. I'm going to go back to the Sethians. Seth. System of the Sethians. Let's get to it. The Sethians. These are the statements which the patrons of the Sethian doctrines make as far as it is possible to declare in a new words. Their system, however, is made up of tenets from natural philosophers and of expressions uttered in reference of different subjects, transferring these to the eternal logos. They explain them as we have declared, but they assert likewise that Moses confirms their doctrine when he says, quote, darkness and mists and tempest. These, the Sethian says, are the three principles of our system, or which he states that three were born in paradise, Adam, Eve, the serpent, or when he speaks of three persons, Cain, Abel, and Seth, and again in three others, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, or when he mentions three patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or when he speaks of the existence of 3 days before sun and moon, or when he mentions three laws, prohibitory, permissive, and adjudicatory of punishment. Now a prohibitory law is as follows: of every tree there is in paradise thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil thou may not eat. But in the passage, come forth from thy land and from thy kindred, and hither into a land which I shall show thee. This law, he says, is permissive. For one who is disposed may depart, and one who is not disposed may remain. But a law adjudicatory of punishment is that which maketh the following declaration: thou shalt not commit adultery. Okay. This entire system of their doctrine, however, is derived from an ancient theologians, Musaeus and Linus and Orpheus, who elucidates especially the ceremonies of initiation as well as their mysteries themselves. For their doctrine concerning the womb is also the tenet of Orpheus, and the idea of the navel, which is harmony, is to be found in the symbolism attached with the bacchanalian orgies of Orpheus, both prior to the observance of the mystic rite of Celis and Triptolemius and Ceres and Proserpine and Bacchus and Eleusis. These orgies have been celebrated and handed down to men in Philum of Attica for antecedent to the Eleusinian mysteries. There are enacted in Philum and Phleum the orgies of her denominated the Great Mother. I think that's Persephone. Is that supposed to be Persephone? I don't know. There is, however, a portico. Anyways, you guys kind of get it. You guys get it. So I could show you more of the. I could show you more of the. Somebody tell me what you want to look up, guys. Tell me what you want to look up. Is awful thing I've ever heard. Yeah, AJ said the description of baby eating is the most awful thing I've ever heard. Let's go back to Irenaeus and see if we can find any cannibalism. We don't find it there. Where did we find that at? Was that in the Maybe that was with Eusebius? Anyways, guys, if you have any suggestions, sorry, I'm just trying to look up stuff here. That was the worst thing ever. Let's see. We can go to anybody have any suggestions? Let me know. Yeah, whatever you guys are interested in, we can go to Irenaeus and look at Simon Magus. Let's look at Simon Magus, chapter 23. Okay. Simon, the Samaritan, was the magician whom Luke, the disciple and follower of the apostles, says, but there was a certain man, Simon by name, who before time used magical arts in that city and led astray the people of Samaria, declaring that he himself was great one, to whom they all gave heed, unless the greatest saying, this is the power of God, which is called great. And to him they had regard, because that, let's see here. So now this Simon of Samaria, whom all sorts of heresies derive their origin, formed this sect out of the following materials. He redeemed the slavery at Tyre, a city of Phoenicia, and a certain woman named Helena, who he was in the habit of carrying her about with him, declaring that this woman was the first conception of his mind, the mother of all, by whom in the beginning he conceived in his mind the thought of forming angels and archangels. For this Enoia, leaping forth from him and comprehending the will of her father, descended to the lower regions of space and generated angels and powers, by whom he also declared the world was formed. But after she had produced them, she was detained by them through motives of jealousy, because they were unwilling to be looked upon for the progeny of any other being. As to himself, he had no knowledge of him whatever. Okay, yada, yada, yada. Thus then the mystic priest belongs to the sect, both led profligate lives and practices magical arts, each one to the extent of his ability. They use exorcisms and incantations, love potions too, and charms, as well as those beings who called paredri, familiars, and onri rom pompi, dream senders, and whatever other curious arts can be had to recourse, are eagerly pressed into their service. They have the image of Simon fashioned after the likeness of Jupiter, and another of Helena in the shape of Minerva, and these they worship. In fine, they have a name derived from Simon, the author of those impious doctrines, being called Simonians, and from their knowledge falsely so called. 1 Timothy 6:20 received its being, as one may learn from their own assertions. The successor of this man was Menander, also a Samaritan by birth, and he too was a perfect adept in the practice of magic. He affirms that the primary power continues unknown to all, but that he himself is the person who has been sent forth from the presence of the invisible being as a savior for the deliverance of men. The world was made by angels, whom, like Simon, he maintains to have been produced by Enoia. He gives too, as he affirms, by means of that magic which he teaches, knowledge to this effect, that one may overcome those very angels that made the world, for his disciples obtain the resurrection of being baptized into him, can die no more, but remain in the possession of immortal youth. So, anyways, guys, geez, we're already past 2 hours. I'm a little exhausted from reading. If you guys, let's find snakes for let's find serpent. Yeah, there's tons of serpents in here. But you guys should definitely, if you can, do what I did and just do a DuckDuckGo search And try to find these books yourself. So this is St. Irenaeus Against Heresies, complete PDF. I would highly recommend everybody searching that up. Also, you can search up Eusebius's Church History, complete PDF. I recommend that. And then I have Epiphanius's, I have book 1 and book 2 and 3, the Panarion, Epiphanius, the Panarion. And then you can get Hippolytus, the Refutation of All Heresies. All 4 of those works are really good in regards to, and you guys can do your own searches and find your own stuff if you want. Let's go to Eusebius and put in serpents. Let's see what we get with Eusebius and serpents. So the persons that became at the time leaders of knowledge, falsely so called. We read that one. We actually read that one. I'm getting hot. Vampirism. You guys are nuts in the chat. You guys are literally nuts. Let's see here. Let's get some. We'll get one more thing, and then we'll call it a night, and I'll read some super chats. Let's just do Ophites. There we go. Doctrine of the Ophites. Okay, here's the Doctrine of the Ophites and the Sethians. Okay. So this is a group that, again, can be traced back to serpent worship before Christianity. This goes all the way back before Christianity. So they have also given names to several persons in their system of falsehood, such as the following. He who was the first descendant of the mother is called Aldaboeth. He again descended from him is the name Io. He from this one is called Sabbath. The fourth is named Adonius. Okay, it goes through a bunch of these names. I'm not going to read all of them. They affirm that many of his disciples were not aware of the descent of Christ into him. Let's see, who are they talking about? Oh, so basically, they're talking about Christ consciousness, basically, and that Christ descending to this world first clothed his sister Sophia. So we can see here the Christ consciousness doctrine, right? Way early in the Ophite system, again, a tradition pre-existing Christianity. So, but Jesus, in so much as he was begotten the virgin through the agency of God, was wiser, pure, and more righteous than all the other men. Christ united to Sophia descended into him, and thus Jesus Christ was produced. So Christ and Jesus are two separate things. They affirm many of his disciples were not aware of the descent of Christ into him, but that when Christ did descend on Jesus, he then began to work miracles and heal and announce the unknown Father and openly to confess himself the Son of the first man. The powers and the Father of Jesus were angry in these proceedings to destroy him when he was being led away for this purpose. They say that Christ himself, along with Sophia, departed from him into the state of incorruptible aeon. While Jesus was crucified, Christ, however, was not forgotten of his Jesus, but sent down a certain energy into him from above, which raised him up again in the body, which they call both animal and spiritual. For he sent the mundane parts back again into the world when his disciples saw that he had risen. They did not recognize him, no, not even Jesus himself, by whom he rose again from the dead. And they assert that this very great error prevailed amongst the disciples, that they imagined he had risen in a mundane body, not unknown that the flesh and blood do not attain to the kingdom of God, which is exact opposite of our theology, right? Such are the opinions which prevail amongst these persons, by whom, like the Linearum Hydra, a many-headed beast has been generated from the school of Valentinus. For some, they assert that Sophia herself became the serpent, of which account she was hostile to the creator Adam, the implanted knowledge in men, for which reason the serpent was called wiser than all others. Moreover, that the position of our intestines through which the food is conveyed by the fact that they possess such a figure or eternal configuration in the form of a serpent reveals our hidden generatrix. Interesting. Okay, guys. I'm gonna end that. We're gonna hop into some of these super chats real quick. Really appreciate everybody being here. Make sure you guys smash that like if you guys can. Smash that like. I know that it was a wild topic, lots of going on. Please smash that like and support the stream. Don't forget we got new members only content. So if you'd like to hear a mathematical challenge to the Darwinian theory, that's up at the website for members. Let's dive into some of these super chats. All right, first super chat comes from James Mist. He says, a blessed and fruitful Lent to you and all the brothers and sisters in the chat. Well, thank you so much, James Mist. Really appreciate that, brother. Thank you for the $5 super chat, and God bless you, and hope you have a wonderful Lent as well. And by the way, a happy Forgiveness Sunday, everybody. If I've wronged you or harmed you in any way, please forgive me. Next super chat comes from the Green Feather. Shout out to the Green Feathers in your family, brother. I hope you're doing well. God bless you. He throws in $20 and says, the vague and unscholarly syncretic beliefs which mystery schools present are like a buffet of bad ideas. With the advent of internet learning, we see a similar exchange of bad ideas as in the ancient world, albeit accelerated by our rate of communication. Yeah, I think that's another thing. I didn't even get into meat. I should have got into all the different instances where people where people don't even want to eat meat, and that this is a common thread through a lot of these Gnostic groups, is that they have like ascetic practices in one way or another, and they and then they don't partake in meat eating, but they have a lot of different other practices. So it's very, very interesting, some of the similarities. You can't help but think maybe some of the spirit cooking, the sexual promiscuity, the idea that gnosis or enlightenment can be attained through the plurality and multiplicity of experiences, of personal experiences. You can see a lot of this stuff, reoccur in our period. And so I think there's just, I want to do more on this, but I think the disenchantment of the world has, reprioritize this idea of esoteric knowledge. And so if you can acquire, as the world exoterically becomes disenchanted and God isn't present and mythology means nothing and there's no spirits and there's no animating force behind nature anymore, finding out esoteric knowledge that may reanimate the world, I think, is much, much more appealing. And so it's no surprise really that this stuff, that we see a resurgence of so much of this stuff. and that there's, a lot of the heresies of the ancient period are the same thing that are being spouted at today. So it's definitely interesting. How surprising it is, I think just depends on where you're coming from when you're looking at it. But yeah, definitely with the speed of communication and the internet, I think there prioritizes this idea in the world of information. Finding secret information is even more interesting. And maybe to a degree that even ties to the appeal of conspiracies and conspiracy theories. And I'm not trying to condemn or chastise or mock. Obviously I believe in many things that people call conspiracies, but that is another sort of secret knowledge in the state of the world of information. And so as propaganda, we live in an information world. Propaganda is certainly part of that information, and some people buy into it and they buy the propaganda. So it's interesting. I'm going to do a whole stream this coming week on the disenchantment. So I'll be speaking more on this topic here soon. But I think there's a lot going on with the disenchantment of the world, post 19th century, 20th century, and in the appeal of the occult, magic, personal experience, esoteric knowledge, all this different types of stuff. So I think we live in to a degree, maybe a comparable period. Maybe that'd be an interesting stream in and of itself, is the similarities and differences between the ancient period and the 21st century. I don't know. Maybe that's someone to think about and get into. So anyways, guys, smash that like if you could. Thank you so much, Green Feathers. I really appreciate the super chat, brother. God bless you and your family. I hope you're doing well. Thank you very much. Again, the Green Feathers says, the vague and unscholarly syncretic beliefs which mystery schools present are like a buffet of bad ideas. With the advent of internet learning, we see a similar exchange of bad ideas as in the ancient world, albeit accelerated by our rate of communication. Great comment, and thank you very much. Again, the Green Feathers. Everybody go subscribe, support our brother. Next super chat comes from David, and David throws in a super chat. It says, is it true that there is no info on the life of Jesus from age 12 through 33? If so, why do you think that is? Well, there's, so that is a Gnostic, that's certainly a quip. Where people talk about, because some of these Gnostic scriptures, for example, like this book, you can flip over to the infancy gospels. I don't know if you guys are familiar. So here's some of the infancy gospels. You see the infancy gospel of Thomas. The infancy gospel of Thomas is pretty interesting. Then you have the infancy gospel of James. Maybe I'll do a stream on just the infancy gospels. But they basically reinterpret the childhood of Christ within this worldview of the archon, the Autoboeth, the evil demiurgic power that created the physical world. And that's really part of these sort of infancy gospels. And you see Christ be a sort of magical figure. He animates a pigeon out of clay and all this different stuff. And the infancy gospel of Thomas. Why? If Christ was God incarnate and the Father, the archon of the Trinity, was having him learn and preserve certain things, because through a process of kenosis, he's self-limited, right? So at the same time he's fully God, he's also fully man. This is one of the mysteries the Orthodox faith asks us, that the Orthodox faith deals with, is how could something be fully God and fully man in one person? This is a profound mystery. This is the completion of two worlds in one person. And maybe God just was waiting for a 3-year ministry, that representative of the Holy Trinity itself. I'm not sure what the church's teaching is on the life of Christ between 12 and 30. I mean, it's 12 and 30. So I don't know where you're getting. I don't know where you're getting 33. Obviously, we have 3 years where he begins his ministry. So David, I think you might have misspoken there. But yeah, you're right. The sort of adolescent teenage years of Jesus. This has been a realm of speculation where you get the wandering Jesus, right? He's an Essene, and he goes to Egypt, and he goes to Persia, and he goes to India, and he goes to China, and then he comes back, and he eventually gets back to the Holy Land, and that's when he starts his journey, right? So I don't know the Orthodox Church's official position on describing the life of Christ through his teenage years. He's probably with his mother. He's probably with Joseph. He's a carpenter. He's learning skills and all that different stuff. Do we have scripture referring to it? No, we don't. Not that's canonical. But you can go to the church and find out what the church's tradition is and see what writings they have talking about their conception of those lost years, the lost years of Christ. There's a lot of different theories abound regarding those lost years. So, David, I appreciate it. It's a good question. And it's one that this area is important to highlight, David, because this has caused a lot of speculation. This is one of the reasons why, again, the infancy gospels and a lot of the Nag Hammadi scriptures, they're able to, one, they either claim that they have the secret teachings or they have a fuller understanding of the life and mission of Christ. So you're hitting on something that's really important here. I say we to definitely check with the Orthodox Church. I'm not sure, and I apologize, I wish I had a better answer for you, David. I'm not sure what the church's official position on the lost years of Christ or why we don't have those. I assume it's because of God's providence waiting for it to be the right time. Next super chat. So thank you very much, David. God bless you, brother. Hope you're having a good Lent. And that was a great question. I wish I could have answered that a little bit better. I apologize. Next super chat comes from Thomas Henderson. And Thomas Henderson throws in $10. Thank you so much, Thomas, for all the support, man. You've been a continual supporter of the stream. He says, Harold Bloom wrote that the American religion in all its forms are essentially Gnostic in character. Thank you, Patrick, for giving us a primer on the roots of Gnosticism. This is a message that really needs to be told. Keep teaching the faith. So thank you so much, Thomas Henderson. Yeah, there's so much to get into regarding this topic that I feel a little overwhelmed. Like even this stream, I feel like I've been talking nonstop, and yet at the same time, I feel like I haven't even scratched the surface. So thank you very much, Thomas. I'm glad that you enjoyed the content. I think Gnosticism is really important. I'm not sure. I've been criticized by other people telling me you shouldn't talk about magic. You shouldn't talk about Gnosticism so much. Yet at the same time, in this stream, we just read 4 church fathers, or at least apologists, St. Irenaeus, Eusebius, Epiphanius, and Hippolytus. All 4 of them are reacting against, the Gnostic heresies and talking about them. So I think it's a topic that we need to be more educated on. If we're going to do apologetics, it's one thing to know the difference between Orthodoxy and Islam, Orthodoxy and Hinduism, Orthodoxy and Protestantism, Catholicism, but Orthodoxy and Gnosticism. It's not as, I don't think as that's being discussed as much as maybe it should be. And so I hope to bring more conversations, more specific, do a stream on the infancy, debunking the infancy gospels of, all this. Like there's so much to get into. There's so many books in the Nag Hammadi. There's so much similarities to Gnosticism and the New Age movement. I mean, it's essentially a Gnostic movement, right? It's all about secret knowledge, self-illumination, Luciferian understandings of the self. So I think as apologists, we all have different specialties. Mine happens to be more in the Gnosticism and the magical arena. Jay's is much more with Catholicism and Protestantism, and he does a great job with Islam. So I plan on making, despite people being upset with me making these videos or talking about magic and Gnosticism so much, I think it's important. I'm gonna keep doing it. So thank you very much, Thomas Henderson. Again, Thomas Henderson said Harold Bloom wrote that American religion in all its forms are essentially Gnostic in character. Thank you, Patrick, for giving us a primer on the roots of Gnosticism. This is a message that really needs to be told. Keep teaching the faith. Thank you so much, Thomas Henderson. I really, really appreciate it. Then AJ super chatted $5 and said, the description of baby eating is the most awful thing I've ever heard. Yeah. Well, AJ, I wouldn't be surprised. There's interesting stuff. Oh, I got a story in here in this book of a woman who was accused of witchcraft. Again, shout out Rachel Wilson and our great stream we did with Rachel on the occult origins of feminism. There's a section in this book and also this book here. This is kind of the contemporary book on this topic. Where there's witches that confess to killing children. Like they confess. Now there's the Inquisition, and so some people were there women that were killed during the Inquisition that were falsely accused. Of course, it was a wild time, and at the same time, there were women who came forth and volunteered information that said that they did these activities. And so that is really wild, that the witchcraft during the medieval ages, the Middle Ages, medieval period, it talked about these, that certain, again, some women were certainly probably killed that had nothing to do, and some of them may have been tortured and confessed to things they didn't do. Some of them weren't tortured, didn't even know who they were, and they confessed through their guilt of sacrificing children, particularly under the age of 3. Under the age of 3, it seemed to be an important period for sort of the ritual magical efficacy of child sacrifice. And so that's what's really interesting is you get into some of that stuff. There's instances of it in the Middle Ages, and I'm sure there's instances of it happening now, right? I'm sure you guys know my opinion on that. So I think, again, abortion or child killing in certain ways has a lot of roots going back to ancient pagan traditions. It makes you rethink about Moloch, Yahweh stopping Abraham from doing it to his son. Seems like this is a historical practice related to magic to one degree or another. So AJ, I understand, brother, that was the Borborites, the filth eaters, and they ate a lot of filthy things, including menstrual blood and semen. So anyways, AJ, thanks for the $5 super chat, brother. I really appreciate it. Oh, Jared Fetzer throws in a super chat. Shout out to Jared Fetzer. Hope you're doing well, brother, and your beautiful family. He throws in $5 and says, it's the gospel of Barnabas and the revelation of Isaiah and revelation of Peter, also Gnostic texts. If so, why? Okay. So Jared Fetzer asks, I think, is the gospel of Barnabas and the revelation of Isaiah and revelation of Peter, also Gnostic texts? The gospel of Barnabas, I'm not too familiar. Is that in the Nag Hammadi? I don't know if I've ever read the gospel of Barnabas. Let me see. So it looks like 2 manuscripts of the Gospel of Barnabas are known to have existed, and they date to the 16th and 17th centuries. They're written in Italian and the other in Spanish. This is a great topic. Thank you for bringing this up, Jared. I need to look more into this. It looks like there's some refutations on it being part of the... Okay, so this is said, the Gospel of Barnabas should not be confused with the Epistle of Barnabas, which was written in the 2nd century Alexandria. But I have not read the Gospel of Barnabas. I should have to check this out. It doesn't look like it's saying that it is it seems to be a sort of misnomer, and that the date of origin is of question regarding the Gospel of Barnabas. But I'll look into that. Maybe that's worth a stream. Thank you very much, Jared. And then you said, in the revelation of Isaiah, in revelation of Peter. Okay, I'm just going to refresh this comment, Jared, because I'm having trouble reading it, just so other people can see it. It's the Gospel of Barnabas and the revelation of Isaiah in revelation of Peter, also Gnostics. The revelation of Peter? Oh, the apocalypse of Peter. Oh, yeah. I have not read... Huh. Yeah, I haven't read this one either. Jared, thank you so much. It is a very early example of the genre. Okay. So before 1886, the Apocalypse of Peter, Revelation of Peter, had only been known through quotations and references in early Christian writings. Yeah, I've heard of this. I've never read this one either. I've read a lot more of the Gnostic, like the Nag Hammadi stuff. It looks like the Apocalypse of Peter, general scholarly consensus is that it's 2nd century. So it very well could be part of a various Gnostic community. I need to read it to see the theology and worldview, to see... Okay, so it says that in regards to the revelation of Peter, Eusebius personally found the work dubious in his work Church History, which we got right here. Eusebius. Let's put in... Yeah, so and if you look up Eusebius Church History, it looks like he has a section specifically on the Apocalypse of Peter. Interesting. I'll have to read Eusebius, but it says Eusebius found it personally dubious. I mean, Jude, okay. Oh, it's general letters and the letters of Barnabas and the so-called apocalypse. So it looks like they potentially could come from the same community. It doesn't look like it's a Gnostic worldview or paradigm, though, in the writings. I'll need to read more about this. This is a really interesting topic. Let me write all this down. That way I can remember it. All right. Thank you very much, Jared. That's I'm going to do some more research. It doesn't look like they don't have overtly Gnostic frameworks. And I think that's why Eusebius, because Clement of Alexandria, although he's not a saint, he claims to have believed the Apocalypse of Peter to be a holy scripture, while Eusebius does not. Yeah, so Eusebius does not. Clement of Alexandria did, it looks like. So I'll have to look more into that. Thank you very much, Jared Fetzer. You gave me something to do. Although I have enough to do, but thank you very much, brother. I really appreciate that. Next super chat comes from Rachel Wilson. Shout out to Rachel Wilson and Based Homeschool Mom. Again, make sure you check out our conversation on the occult origins of feminism. She said, happy Forgiveness Sunday to you. Well, happy Forgiveness Sunday to you, Rachel. Excellent stream as always. Thanks for everything you do. Well, thank you very much, Rachel, for the super chat. It's very kind of you. I hope you and your family are doing well. God bless you guys. And thank you very much. I'm glad that you enjoyed the stream. It was kind of all over the place. I had a lot to say. I didn't know how to organize it, but I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for coming on. We got to do another one soon. And thank you very much for the super chat. I truly do appreciate it. So everybody, Rachel Wilson again throws in another super chat. Don't miss our stream together. She says, happy Forgiveness Sunday to you. Excellent stream as always. Thanks for everything you do. Well, thank you, Rachel, and God bless your family. I hope you guys stay safe and keep on keeping on. Next super chat comes from Christos Papadopoulos. And he says, through the intercession of thy saints, O Christ our God, have mercy on us sinners. Have a blessed great Lent. Now, thank you so much, Christos Papadopoulos. Really appreciate that, brother. And he throws a very generous $50 super chat. Thank you so much, Christos. Very generous, brother. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. God bless you, brother. Again, he says, through the intercessions of thy saints, O Christ our God, have mercy on us sinners. Have a blessed great Lent. And thank you so much, Christos, and amen to that. I couldn't agree more. I hope you have a blessed, may your family be blessed, and you have also a great Lent and a great 2022. Stay safe, my brother. And it looks like Jared Fetzer threw in another dollar and says, is the assertion of Isaiah and Revelation in the assertion of... Okay. Yeah, Jared, you get a great super chat, brother. You got me. I'm not familiar with the Gospel of Barnabas nor the Revelation of Peter, the Apocalypse of Peter. Those are two things that I'm going to have to definitely do some more digging into. So no doubt about that. But thank you very much, Jared, for your support. You've been a continual supporter. Again, God bless you, man. Enjoyed our one-on-ones. I hope your family and everything's doing well and everybody's staying safe. So thank you, guys, very, very much. Please smash that like, guys. That was the last super chat. I really appreciate everybody being here. I hope everybody enjoyed tonight's stream. And we'll have to do another one on a similar topic here soon. Again, special shout out to Jared Fetzer. Special shout out to Christos Papadopoulos. Special shout out to Rachel Wilson and AJ, Thomas Henderson, and David, the Green Feathers, and James Mist. So again, thank you guys very, very much. Shout out to James Mist, the Green Feathers, David, Thomas Henderson, AJ, Jared Fetzer, Rachel, Christos Papadopoulos. Thank you guys so much. Please smash that like, and I will be back this week with another stream. Guys, enjoy your Lent, and God bless you guys. So I'll try to be back either Tuesday or Wednesday with another stream. I think I'm going to go on the topic of disenchantment, so should be another good one. But until then, as always, guys,